So welcome to LGBT Youth Work webinar. I'm Laura Keegan and I'm a youth work specialist for the MYA. Kev just took us through a bit of the housekeeping stuff, but just to remind everyone that, as he just said, this is being recorded. So if you don't want to have your camera on, you can turn it off. But I would really encourage you to turn your camera on because I find it really useful, particularly in breakout rooms. And when we're feeding back and having discussions, it's much easier if we can see the people that we're talking to. If you could keep muted when other people are speaking, it's really helpful so we don't get any of that background noise or echoing. I can't stand it when I can hear my own voice in the background. I find it really distracting. So I guess I think a lot of people feel the same way. Also use the chat to ask questions and chat to other people publicly in the chat room and the chat box. We will be using breakout rooms. The format for this webinar is that we're going to have a series of questions that will be discussed in breakout rooms, and then we'll feed back together as a whole group. If you need to leave the meeting at any point, then if you're in a breakout room, you just click leave room, and if you're in the main room, just click leave meeting. And if you need any help during the session, then give us a shout. We will do our best to help you. And we'll go from there. So we're going to start with, and I'm going to try and be a bit fancy. For a lot of you, this might not be fancy, but we're going to try and use the whiteboard and annotate. If you guys are using a phone or a tablet, it might be a bit more tricky to annotate the whiteboard, but give us a shout if you do need some support with that. So what I want you to do is have a think about what are the key issues for LGBTQ plus young people have faced during COVID. So just have a think about that. What are the key issues for young people, LGBT young people? And I am going to launch the whiteboard so everyone can add to it. And then we'll have a little bit of time to reflect on those answers. And the whiteboard is launching now. Does everyone know how to annotate the whiteboard themselves? Yes, no? No? Does anybody, okay, so you should be able to see the bar at the top. There should be a bar that you can use your cursor over. And if you click on the text, it will then open up a box where you can then type your answers in. So if you could have a go, that would be great. Oh, someone's drawing already. Rachel, well done. Doesn't matter if it looks a bit messy. Oh, thank you, Charlie. That's great.
I can't see the bar.
Okay. If you move your cursor around the top of the screen, can you see it then?
No.
Okay. If you do have anything that you want to add, if you put it in the chat, I can then copy it onto here if that's useful.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's not a problem. I'll just give everyone a couple more minutes just to add anything they want to, and also have some time to look at what other people have written. Okay, thank you everyone for adding to the board. I think it worked, just about. Does anyone before we go and have more of a group discussion about it, does anyone want to share what they wrote? You can feel free to unmute. No one's feeling like sharing, that's okay. But having a look at all of these points and these key issues, I would have to certainly agree. Has anybody seen anything there that they would disagree with? No? Okay. So I'm going to take us out of here and back to the PowerPoint. I have lots of screen sharing and to-ing and fro-ing, I'm afraid. Okay, so thank you for adding to the whiteboard. I think that was an interesting way to share our thoughts on the key issues. What I'm going to do now is show you the next slide. So this is the question I want everybody to focus on. So what is the impact of the issues identified for LGBTQ plus young people? So thinking about the key issues that we just identified on the whiteboard, I want you to think of what is the impact of those issues. And I'm going to put you into breakout rooms to have a 15-minute discussion. So whilst you're in the breakout room and discussing this, if you could make a few notes of the summary of your discussion and nominate a spokesperson to feedback when we come back into the main group. I am just going to launch the breakout rooms now. And I'm going to open the rooms and you'll be either sent straight into it or invited to join. So you'll have 15 minutes. I'm just going to pause the recording.
Hey?
I'm just going to pause the recording.
Oh, yeah.
So just don't sit in the dead. Hello, everyone. Everyone's just coming back in. So hopefully you're able to have some good discussions in your breakout room. Which group would like to feedback first about what you talked about?
We're still getting people coming in.
Oh, okay, sorry. Everyone back? I think everyone's back now. So which group would like to feedback first?
I can.
Oh, thanks, Amanda.
No worries. We talked in our group a lot about social media and online stuff. So we discussed like a couple of different ways that could impact LGBT young people at the moment. So there's possibility of like online bullying going on and stuff, which is obviously an issue for all young people. But we also discussed the possibility of like how online you can create your own kind of safe space. Like you can actually say, no, I'm not looking at that, I'm not looking at that. So potentially LGBTQ plus young people could create a space for themselves where they surround themselves with like-minded people, which then is potentially a problem when they go back to school and they can no longer control who they are around and what people are saying to them, etc. So we've discussed that. We also discussed the possibility that young people might have unsupportive parents, and that the balance between being at home with them and trying to kind of express themselves in the home situation is not then balanced with able to come to group where they're encouraged, or wherever they feel safe. Like there's no balance, they have to stay at home. So if that is the case for them, that could be quite intense and difficult. And we just shared some experiences about like barriers of online, like young people coming into like online youth spaces for the first time. They can put barriers in themselves, like not switching on their camera, muting their microphone. Whereas if they were to join a club, they'd still have the same anxieties, but you could talk to them outside of the group. You could try and help integrate them into the group a bit. I don't know, it feels more natural, I suppose, in the real world, and you can have a private conversation, whereas in this format you can't just have a side chat. So yeah, we talked about those sorts of things. If there's anything anyone else wanted to add from our group that I've forgotten, please feel free.
Laura, are you still there, or have you frozen? I think we've lost the host, everyone, I'm afraid. Does the other group want to feedback? And I'll try and find out what's happened to Laura. Who was in the other group?
We had a discussion about online, and it's an interesting thing, isn't it, online, because everybody assumes that everybody can be online and everybody's in a safe place when they're online. But of course, when you're talking about something that's really private, like LGBTQ issues, and you're not in a family that either understand that or even know, young people have got a real big issue because they're stuck in a place where they have to whisper, or they can't even talk. And I think it's a problem. And I think also with online things, it's about, have they got the ability to go online? Not everybody's got phones. Not everybody's got phones with credit. So it's a big issue. So we were talking about the walk-in option is definitely the best, or definitely a best way of being accessible to young people that need support. And this social element is lacking for everybody at the moment. So I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. I don't know if anybody else from my group wants to jump in with anything else.
Yeah, just on that as well. I think, not that we necessarily discussed this, but I know that in general, parents confiscating phones and cutting off internet time and all that kind of thing happens, doesn't it, as some form of, deterrent or punishment or whatever. And I think, unfortunately, that could push the problem even further. Not saying that that's wrong form of punishment, but I mean, it just exacerbates the issue. We also just kind of talked about that. Well, we started the conversation, I guess, because we're setting up an LGBTQ group, and I think what we're trying to look at is what is sort of different for LGBTQ. So things like feeling isolated, suicidal, that kind of thing. I mean, I think that has risen in general across the population because of COVID, rather than it being a specific LGBTQ issue. But another lady that was on our group who works in a hospital was saying that actually, although mental health concerns have risen, LGBTQ does seem to be quite a predominant sector of that. And I think, and we were sort of discussing why, and a number of things, but she was saying that, they all individually have their own sort of factors that don't necessarily correlate to the other sort of experiences. But in general, it's the lack of community, the lack of feeling that they're part of something seems to be the biggest sort of overall issue.
Yeah, because being part of community can help you affirm and create your identity. So people who were maybe starting to establish an identity then haven't been able to, they might still have some unanswered questions and thoughts and lacking that support.
It's interesting. Sorry, I'm going to barge in a little bit because you reminded me of something I was chatting about last night. I had to do a talk last night on the impact of COVID on young people. And I was thinking about all the different transitions that young people go through between about 11 and 20 odd. And I went through my life, and so there's puberty, there's going from primary school to high school, there's exams, there's beginning to socialise, there's starting going out to the pub and the health impacts of all that, starting work. So all the transitions really, although the vast majority of transitions you go through, go through that period, sort of the period of young people that we're working with. And it's where you start forming your identity, and it's where you start forming friendships. And you're right about the community thing, because for for LGBTQ people, that community is a real source of support. And especially during lockdown, if you've not had a chance to find, discover, make friends with that community, it takes a lot longer to pick that up, I would have thought, than it does just to find a few mates down at school, because you have to make more of an effort. You have to go places that, like LGBT youth clubs or the village or whatever else, and so that must be quite a profound impact, just in terms of stifling the development of a supportive community, I think. So yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. That's it's a good point. Sorry, Laura, I barged in there. How's your internet?
That's okay. I'm back, so that's a good thing. I hope. I missed the start of that conversation, so you didn't barge in.
Has anyone else got any other impacts that they think might be? Oh right, yeah, Neil, you talked about rural settings. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? Oh.
Yeah, I'm here. So I was getting my mouse to go over to unmute. Well, yeah, rural settings. I think we had a rural session the other week, talking about just rural in its own right. But of course, LGBTQ, there's going to be, I imagine, there's going to be more of an issue because of space and distance between things and accessing services and accessing other groups. Transport's a big issue. You name it, rural settings, I imagine, have a big problem. And I think all young people have that issue in a rural setting. So they can't just walk down the street and catch a bus, potentially. So I imagine that's accessing services is a big issue, I think. So that probably drives more people online. And then, of course, we go down the issues we've already talked about of being online and not being able to sometimes. So, and then Wi-Fi in a rural setting as well sometimes isn't brilliant. So the issues start building up, don't they?
Has anyone got any experience of online groups or online youth work? Oh, sea of blank faces.
We're doing online work.
How's it going?
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite difficult. We've had there's I think Amanda said, there's a lot of barriers to young people engaging, and our numbers have been quite low. But over the past maybe month or so, we've really reviewed how we're doing that, and we're looking at creating a much more kind of accessible and like sustainable digital youth work presence. So we're looking at using Discord to create a whole server that young people can engage with in a similar way to they would in the youth centre, and it can run alongside and not necessarily just kind of be almost a little bit of an addition to our main work. It'll be a main source of the youth work we deliver as well. And that's kind of part of the reason I'm here, because as we've put it together, we've said to young people, what so within a Discord server you create channels which would be like chat rooms kind of thing. What kind of groups or projects do you want? And I was surprised to find how many young people said that an LGBT group is something that they would want to be able to access. We've had a lot of discussion about not necessarily, not making that space exclusively for LGBTQ young people, people who are curious, people understand, allies, all those kind of things. And they didn't want to create a situation where, because it's online, which I think is what we raise in our group as well, there is a little bit more risk with online stuff and developing trust and stuff. We didn't want to create a situation where someone joins and goes, so and so's in the group, therefore they must be gay, or that kind of situation. So yeah, that's where we're at with it.
Just moving on, I was just going to add to that. What do people think about groups that are exclusively for LGBTQ plus young people? Should they be exclusive, or do people take a different view? What are people thinking about that?
Personally, I think all groups should be a safe space for everyone, no matter what community they or however they identify themselves. I think it's great having these separate groups to help people become confident, identify themselves, and ask questions. But at the same time, is it also saying, well, you can only be part of this group because you identify within this community? Whereas for me personally, I think we should be about bringing all communities together and accepting everybody in whatever group they want to be part of, if that makes sense at all.
We also had the conversation with the young people that we were working with around some of the labels that people identify as. Just because you've identified as one doesn't mean that that's what you're going to be for the rest of your life. You might change, you might learn more about yourself, you might find something else that fits better or you're more comfortable with. And we didn't want to create something that was, you know, a space where young people had to conform to labels, particularly I think as a young person, you're exploring your identity and developing it. So we thought that was quite important with our group, absolutely having a focus. So this group is focused on LGBTQ issues and support, but not exclusively for just those young people, kind of singling them out in that way.
I think it's helpful to have allies and friends come to LGBT groups, because then they can learn what the LGBTQ friends have experienced and learn how to be good allies and better allies. And they might not realise, they might just think, oh, my mate's gay, and then they might not realise actually how much did it take him, and oh, I didn't realise that kid at school was being horrible to him, I'm going to make sure I stand up for him. And good for them to kind of understand and share their experiences. Otherwise it might become a bit isolated, whereas we want everyone to get on and not all just be seen as different and a separate community.
I think there's kind of different reasons. I'm all for mixed groups, to be honest. I think there's a space for exclusive groups, as you say, for gathering support and asking questions that you wouldn't, you know, all that sort of stuff. But one of the things that always struck me, particularly about this issue, actually, was in Manchester. I was chatting to Laura about this while you were off in breakout rooms. I started going out in Manchester when I was about sort of 16, and it was all quite rough. And the one bit of Manchester that wasn't rough was the gay village. And Manto, I don't know if anyone's heard of Manto's. Manto's was it was one of the first gay bars in the country that had plate glass windows. So all the other bars before that had been sort of shut away, frosted glass, all of that, a bit of anonymity. Manto's was plate glass windows, so you could see who was in there, and they were the first bar in the village to advertise. Their strapline was for fags, fagettes, and friends. So it's deliberately for allies and just, you know, so long as you were okay kind of thing. And what it did, and it was combined with, I think, the fact that the rest of Manchester was a pretty scary place to be. But what it did was it created what the gay village is now. You know, I mean, it created this place that was accepting, had its own rules and all that sort of stuff. And it did more for LGBTQ rights in Manchester and the country, really, than anything had done before. And so I do think there's a space for kind of exclusive spaces, but I think the power of safe spaces that are mixed is often kind of underestimated, really. And I always think of Manto's and what it did to remind me of that.
I agree. I think the goal would be to have mixed spaces. Well, I don't know, I'm just reflecting on it just now. I think we're quite in a transitional period, I think, where like it has been that this has become a more accepted thing, like accepted thing in society at the moment. Like we were talking in our group earlier about TV and social media and news and all of that. It's becoming more prominent, more accepted. But I think there are still issues. So the group that I work in, still doesn't share the location of the group widely because of hate crime, etc. So I think that that is still a factor. And if you do have open groups, depending where you are, depending what the issues are, you could open yourself up to that, which is damaging, very damaging to young people. And I think you're right. They do that. Some need that exclusive group, but I think at the moment we might have exclusive groups, but if we're moving towards a mixed group, we're moving towards acceptance. I think this is kind of like having the exclusive group is a transitional step. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm using the right words, but yeah.
Yeah, I also really agree with Amanda. Sorry to jump in, but I just think I think we would probably, everyone here would love the idea of everybody all being together and it being great, but we have got to acknowledge that there are going to be problems, and there are going to be people, and some young people that aren't necessarily going to be as pleasant, perhaps because of issues that they're facing individually. And I think it's perhaps the different way of looking at it. Do we just have a group for everybody that sort of slightly encompasses LGBTQ, or do we have an LGBTQ club that then inevitably opens up and just will take everybody because everybody's okay with it? You know, and it's about sort of deciding, I think, which factor you go with.
I think for me that it's really important that we have safe spaces for everybody, and having exclusive LGBT groups for young people can be that first step to the safe space. And I think some of the things that when we look at opening it up, we know that actually for any person, let alone a young person, starting to join a group on their own can be a really, really difficult thing to do. So I wonder if there's a way that groups can remain exclusive with an avenue in to be supported by a friend that is an ally. I think that's something perhaps that could be considered and might be useful for some young people. But I guess it is about looking at the groups that you're working with and what's going to be right for them. And if you're keeping an open mind about changing it if needed, then it'll always meet the needs of that group. Does anyone else have anything else they want to say? Should we move on to the next discussion? Right, I'm going to move us on. I'm going to share the screen. Oh, I can't share the screen. Kev, can you make me host again, please? Okay, so we've just discussed that. So this is the next discussion point. So what could the best response be to minimise impact? So we were speaking about impact in the last discussion. So this is about what is the best response. So thinking about our roles as youth workers, what can we do to minimise the impact to LGBTQ plus young people? I'm going to put you into breakout rooms again. I'm going to attempt to mix them up, so perhaps you'll be in a different room. Bear with me. Okay, I think everyone is back now. So who would like to feedback first?
We will go first.
Thank you.
Yeah, we kind of did go off on a bit of a tangent actually, but something that kind of we spoke a lot about, because it was something that somebody else said that really resonated with me, where we're looking to form an LGBTQ group, is to kind of be prepared on all this sort of potential scenarios, potential questions, and sort of specifically sort of look in ourselves and decide, like, how do we feel about these? What are our own values? What are the values that we want to promote, or etc. Because yeah, there's going to be some, you know, some challenging things that are sort of put to us potentially, and it will be related to sort of, sorry, that I got confused in my head, but basically the lady was saying that she had a sort of a challenging scenario and actually felt like she at the time probably wasn't able to give as good advice about it, because it sort of hadn't really been something that she had sort of settled with. And yeah, it just sort of, I thought that was really great advice about thinking of all those things before, you know, they could be a topic of conversation.
Did you come to any conclusions about what your values are around that.
Well, something that came up to sort of contribute to that was we were talking about like young women's only groups and young men only groups, and a young women's group that had asked if their boy mate could come because he wasn't like other girls, and therefore what is your opinion on gender, and does that open it up to everyone? What does he share with them? But then is it good that he would come to the group and then see the women's side of their experiences? Yeah, we went off on many tangents, but yeah, questioning. So, what are your values if to do with like gender and experiences of different sexualities, etc.?
I think we kind of, on that note, I think we kind of came to the idea that it would be good to have allies. At least let people bring a friend that's an ally at the beginning, because with like the boy potentially joining the female only group, he can then witness and learn and etc. all the sort of things like catcalling and how that affects people and etc. And so potentially again it can be, you know, helping allies understand many of the situations that go on. With values, I think we just kind of thought about it in a sense of whatever your own values are, as long as they're not hurting other people, you know, are okay, even if they're different to like each other or whatever, and being able to teach, you know, young people that as well, like sort of, you know, your feelings on gender might be one thing, but that's different to somebody else's feelings, and as long as you're sort of nice, then that's okay. You know, it's sort of where we got to, but I don't know if that's a bit vague.
I think sometimes things start from a vague position, don't they? And it's once you get into that situation and you're in a place where you are willing to think about it, that you can then start to develop your response to that.
I think also that one rings true to me a little bit. It's I'm a trustee of a charity. Laura and I were wondering whether this would come up at all in the thing, and it has done. I'm a trustee of a charity, mental health charity in Manchester. And so, you know, I mean, everybody who's a member of that organisation has some sort of mental health issue. So, you know, all the stuff that goes along with it, you know, abuse and all of that. And there's a women's group, and at the moment there's a ongoing problem, you know, argument almost, because there's one young, well, they identify as non-binary, but I think sort of moving towards identifying as female, want to be in the women's group. Some women don't want them there. And so that whole debate about sex-based rights or gender-based rights is blowing up in a situation where everybody, you know, it's not ideological, it's emotional, a lot of it. These are people who have suffered abuse. They're people who, you know, their mental health is a little fragile. And so what we're doing with that is, I mean, we're at a point with it at the moment where there's disagreement, and it feels like the two sides are pretty intractable. Not everyone in the women's group doesn't want this other person there, but some don't. And so trying to mediate it, we're in a position where we're kind of, what we're saying at the moment is kind of, well, there isn't agreement at the moment. We're trying to create safe spaces where people can explore those issues and have a dialogue. And so what we're saying is, okay, well, we're going to park it for a bit, and not in terms of the issue, but we're not going to make a decision yet until we can find a way that we can discuss these things that's safe for everybody. And that we're trying to get people to recognise how their various positions and how their ways of discussing things are unsafe for each other, if you like. And so getting them to focus on that and how the discussions take place, and recognising that that might be a process that takes an awfully long time, is the way that we're dealing with it. But it's very, very tricky indeed. But I mean, you know, I think the first bit has to be about creating a space where that dialogue can happen without people feeling attacked. And and if it takes ages to get there, then that's worth taking ages over, I suppose, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult issue. I don't know if that was helpful. That felt like me just unloading there.
Could the other group feedback a summary of their discussion, please?
Yes.
Thanks,
we talked about minimizing impact. So we talked about trust, confidentiality, support. Like talking is, the best thing. Like we spoke about, we can't change the parents' attitude. We can't fix that, but we can talk to young people. And then we kind of just started discussing, well, how do we make ourselves available for that? Like, if we don't know, we don't know. But how do we create the space? Because I was just saying that I work on detached, and I try really hard not to make a judgment, not to assume anything. But if I'm coming up to a group of young people who I assume are lads, there is, I often find that I can't ask, like, even if we're doing like a consent form or something, if I say, what is your gender? The response is hilarity, jokes, like, how dare you think that I'm not a man, or, stuff like that. So in my trying to be not assuming and in my trying to be inclusive, it almost brings up more barriers for anybody in that group who would want to talk about that sort of an issue. So I just sort of said, how do we make ourselves available for those people? And Poppy, she just left, but Poppy was saying that one of the things that she's done in the past in clubs and stuff is she said she called them youth voice cards. I've not come across them before, but like just cards with different topics that we speak about on, and just like laying them out in front of young people and saying, what do you want to talk about? What's your ideas and your opinions on these topics? And I think that's a really good way of just showing young people what we're open to talk about. And one of those things being LGBTQ+, because I feel that if I was to do that with a group like I've just described, even if they didn't choose to talk about LGBTQ+, somebody would have a comment about the card and somebody would say something, which then opens the door for me to like step in and say, well, that's not really that's not appropriate language, or that's, it just opens the way for anyone in the group who might want to actually discuss those issues, even if they don't want to do it in that particular group. They know that I'm approachable about those things. So I found that really helpful for me, just to like think about ways. And I think somebody else in the tea break about this similar issue suggested like a poster in the window with the flag on, the rainbow flag, or I think whoever it was who said it, like carried a mug with the LGBTQ+ flag on, just to sort of signal to young people that you are approachable about these things. That was the main bit that we discussed in our group.
Thank you. I'm aware we're kind of running out of time, so I was wondering, we've got the last question, if I just put it on the screen and we perhaps have a group discussion about it without going into the breakout rooms. I'm going to share the screen now. So this is having a think about what innovative measures could we take to make open youth work more inclusive. I think it kind of leads on really well from the feedback you just made, Amanda, actually. So in all types of youth work, so in detached, what sort of things, what measures could we take that's different to what we're doing right now to make it more inclusive for young people from the LGBT+ community? I'm going to take us back to the main screen if everyone just has a look at that question for a second. This is what we're going to discuss. Okay, so anyone got any thoughts or ideas?
I just need to apologise for vaping there. I realised how unprofessional that was. I thought I was off the screen. I'm really sorry.
Don't worry, crack on.
I think no one would have noticed. I didn't notice.
I didn't notice.
You're going to feel embarrassed and.
You can edit it out. You're all right.
To be honest, I noticed, and I just wondered what flavour you had.
It's some sort of caramel thing. Oh, I'm really sorry. What I was. Anyway.
That's all right. Yeah, going back to the question about innovative measures. I don't know about it being innovative. I can't even say the word now. But Amanda, you were talking about in the tea break where it was actually Vanessa Rogers that was talking about having the pride flag on a mug, and it just kind of indicates to young people they don't know her, but she is that they can approach her about that, and she's a safe person. So it was just about finding ways to identify yourself as a safe person to young people that might be in need of support. But anyone got any other ideas of things they can do?
I think in our group, one of the things we were talking about is, which kind of fits into this, is, so where we started around the discussion, is it exclusive, is it not, are we inviting allies and things, is to make sure our work is participative and that we are led by young people. Again, I'm not sure it's innovative, but I think our plan, so we're in the situation where we're looking to set this group up and we are going to start online. And it's really important to me that this group is led by young people and that it's their experiences, their what's important to them, what matters to them, and that's what leads it. And I think and kind of going back to what oh, I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry, man who was vaping.
Oh yeah, Kevin, sorry.
Kevin, no, sorry. What Kevin was saying before is we're not, just because we're youth workers doesn't mean we have all the answers, doesn't mean that we know everything. And, you know, when we're looking at kind of safeguarding issues or disclosures, we're clear as youth workers where our boundaries are in terms of what we share of our own personal experiences and what we don't. And we want to create a space that is not led by youth worker voices. Yes, we will go and make sure we've got all the training that we can and as much knowledge and go and learn what we can, but it's a facilitation space for young people's discussions, for them to explore their issues together and to lead the project and the work through them. And it, you know, things like being inclusive and how do we change this and what do we need to do, if it's led by them rather than you know, like our policy is written based on what's mattering and important for them, and being focused in that way. I think that's, at the moment, I see as being the best way to make sure that what we're doing is relevant and impactful, and the best way that we can do it.
Sorry, everyone, I just had to check our camera monitors.
I'm wondering, because I'm trying to think of some of the clubs that I've worked in the past, and some of them really weren't inclusive spaces, you know. They were certainly not for LGBTQ people. And while sort of non-inclusive language and hateful language and stuff would be challenged, I can pretty much guarantee that they weren't helping people who were LGBTQ feel comfortable, and then often, I mean, those people wouldn't have attended. And I'm wondering, one of the projects, and it doesn't relate to LGBTQ work, but I'm wondering if it translates. There was a project in Greenwich, well, it was Eltham actually, years and years and years ago, that was working with issues around race. And the project worked specifically with, it's identified a group of young men in this club that were racist. They were sort of young racist white men. And they set up a separate project just for those lads, and it was lads, for them to talk openly and explore what was going on there, really, aside from everyone else in the club kind of thing. And I'm wondering if there could be parallels for working in areas that you know, for whatever reason, aren't inclusive, for doing specific work around that sort of thing. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that something that could translate, do you think? How it worked in Elton was the attitude of the youth workers was, I think you can still get a video of it online, the attitude of the youth workers was slightly less, no, you can't say that, and more kind of, what's going on there? Where are you getting these ideas from? And so people use language that we'd all find absolutely appalling. But rather than it being condemned, it was explored in an area where it wasn't going to offend anyone else. And challenged, you know, but challenged in a way that was less kind of, this isn't the space for that, and more, what's behind all this? What's going on? Why do you feel like this?
Yeah, it's important to explore it and have discussions. Like the other day, someone on my Facebook posted that they were like outraged because this trans woman had been playing basketball in a women's team, and instead of just jumping on it, you could just go, oh, don't be so transphobic. I was like, well, just that, you know, I play roller derby and I skate with trans teammates, and actually it's, you know, I see them as just females, me, it's no problem. And so, and by that they actually learn, because if all they've heard is people saying, oh, this is wrong, they're not going to learn. And I think they got a lot out of it. And I also made the comment, I said, and if this is about sex, then what about women that get changed next to lesbians in the changing room, if they've got this issue with trans women being in there, you know, really, you know, so sort of gently challenging him. And his mate kept going, oh, I'm just going to put a wig on and go in the women's showers. It just made him start looking at actual tit, because his mate actually started to realise what it was actually really about.
It's very tempting to say, go on then, isn't it, in that sort of situation?
Definitely. I mean, you know, young people have used racist language in our centre before, and instead of just saying, oh, you can't say that, we're like, what do you think that word means? Where have you heard it? And you do understand, you know, because if you just jump on them and tell them off, they're not going to change their behaviour or understand why it's offensive.
And also not view us as being supportive if they do have a problem with something else. You know, if they, quite often it's learned, isn't it? And if they've learned it from something and they do decide that they want to challenge their learned behaviour, if they feel that we're a supportive venue for that, that's different, you know, than just saying, no, don't do that, go away, you know.
And I also wanted to add, talking about, we're talking about like the LGBTQ mugs. We've got just inside the door all the LGBT flags, and there's an ally flag on there as well, which I didn't know existed. And you know, so sometimes, you know, there was a young man on his way out the other night, and he was like, oh, what's this? And he was like going through them, and he was like, what does this one mean? And it opened the discussion just by having them on a wall. And if someone who was LGBT came in, they would see that. And we used to have up, but I need to reprint it actually because it wasn't laminated. It was like a, you know, keep calm things, and it was in a trans card that said keep calm and respect pronouns. And I put that up after someone did disrespect someone's chosen pronoun. So I really, that was a good one as well. And just having those things dotted about, making you seem like you are inclusive.
Yeah, there's the word heteronormativity is one that cropped up over the last few years, wasn't it? But I think it's a really powerful word, because it does make you think about, not necessarily being exclusive, but assuming that heterosexuality is the norm. And there's loads and loads and loads of little signals generally that kind of affirm that. And so, yeah, things like the mugs, the flags, whatever else, consciously putting those there to be less heteronormative, I think. Yeah.
I'm sure people have, you know, worked hard on adapting their language, but definitely in the past, there was a young man who said he was in a relationship, and someone said like, oh, he's a lucky girl, and he was like, it's a boy. So just thinking about that as well, and if someone does slip up, for them to just reflect on it.
I was talking about this with a colleague last night actually, like just the use of open questions, like she said, you know, for her she was just like, oh, did you have a good Christmas, or did you have a good holiday? And the response was, oh, my mum died. So she just kind of said she felt stupid then after asking that question. And it is just a normal question, but just thinking about opening it out a bit more, so that then, you know, the person responding can choose to disclose that, or could talk about something else, or like I think that's really particularly relevant for LGBT stuff, like asking the open question rather than who's the lucky girl.
Well, and possibly training as well, you know, because that's not the sort of thing that necessarily comes naturally to everyone. And so, you know, letting people know that that's okay and ways to do it might be useful.
And I think it's important as well as with the training, if you've got, we talk about having the flags up and some posters which kind of can trigger some conversation, which is really useful. You've got to have the staff team that are willing and supportive of promoting that in a positive way. Because if people don't feel comfortable with it, they'll just go, oh, I don't really know what that means, or just it can be very, you know, although we've got these things displayed, they've got to have more meaning than that. It's got to be transferred into the culture of the space. So I think there is a lot of work that can be done with that to making places more inclusive for LGBTQ plus young people. And I think just knowing we've all got a long way to go with this, nothing's perfect, but I think if we keep moving in the right direction, it's important. So just the conversations happening is positive.
So something that cropped up recently, we started doing like a period poverty project. We donated a lot of supplies, and in promoting that, using like gender neutral language, and not, you know, there might be some trans young men who are, you know, need those products and they don't want to see it just as being targeted at girls, so being careful of wording of things.
Yeah, and I think even like with like our colleagues in other professions as well. I worked in sexual health before this role, and one of the young people that would come to the drop-in wanted to see the nurse to talk about some contraception, and they identified as male, and that was a real struggle for the nurse to get over. Once they'd got over that, that was not a problem, but it was useful as from a youth worker's perspective to bridge that gap in information and to be supportive of that young person accessing that service. Has anyone else got anything they want to add in? I'm conscious of the time. Kev, you've added in the chat, this is the evaluation form, yeah?
Yeah, so before we all go, if you don't mind clicking on that link, it'll open up in your browser, and then you can fill out the evaluation form in your own time. But if you log off before you've clicked on that, then we lose it. And if you would fill it in, that would be great, just because it's useful for us. We'll be doing this sort of thing again. Please don't mention the vaping. And and because we're funded by the lottery as well, it's useful to give feedback to the lottery about how it's all gone. So yeah, if you would do that, we'd be really grateful for it. Thank you. You got anything to say to wrap up, Laura?
Just thank you everyone for coming, and I think we've had some really interesting conversations, and hopefully some connections can be made for people to be able to continue that support outside of this space.